Hello and welcome to Today's Take, hosted by me, Jane Azzopardi, the podcast that goes beyond the headlines to give you the story behind the story that you see on TV. And this week, we are heading to Washington, D.C., where victims of Jeffrey Epstein have had a huge political victory.
The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Just the one no. Let's go live now to Nine's US correspondent, Reid Butler. Reid, what happens here?
Sarah, the bill could pass through the Senate. That is the next step as soon as tonight. And if it does pass, it will then hit Donald Trump's desk. And the US president has indicated that he will sign that legislation, which would compel the US Department of Justice to release all of the remaining files relating to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. That is huge news here. The issue, it's really proven to be a thorn in the side of Donald Trump, one of the defining issues of his second term. He's not been accused of any wrongdoing, but the president's name has appeared in some emails written by Jeffrey Epstein that have already been released. A roller coaster, certainly, but politics aside, it's also been a massive day for Jeffrey Epstein's victims and also the family of his victims.
I stand here today to declare that their tactics of fear and intimidation did not work. Virginia's spirit could not be broken. She became a beacon of hope, a warrior, fighting not just for herself, but for every survivor who suffered in silence.
So it looks like answers could potentially be on the way, guys, but the question is, if and when those documents are released, what exactly will be redacted?
Let's bring in Nine's US correspondent, Reid Butler, who has been following all the developments in this long-running story for us. Reid, welcome to Today's Take.
Good to be here, Jane.
Give us a sense, first of all, just how big a deal the vote this week was.
Yeah, I don't think it is an exaggeration to say it is a huge deal, Jane, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it has to become law now, regardless. So this legislation that passed through, it overwhelmingly passed through the House and then the Senate as well. That means it is going to be the law of the land. Donald Trump just needs to sign this legislation, and he has said that he will sign it. But regardless, there are plenty of other little quirks and everything in this process, but this will become law, especially because it has had such an overwhelming support in both in Congress. And that law, it compels the Department of Justice to release all of the remaining Epstein files, so those thousands and thousands of documents relating to the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. So compels, that word, it means forces. So the department has to hand that over eventually. So that is a big deal. That is the main thing. This is been overwhelmingly voted for here. The other reason it is, of course, a very big deal is because it's something that the survivors have been fighting for so long. They want all of these files released and they want transparency. And then from a political perspective, Jane, it is a absolutely huge deal because it is a big loss, no matter which way you look at it, for Donald Trump. He didn't want this to go through, and he lost clearly the support of his own party, the Republicans in both the House and the Senate. They voted overwhelmingly to release this against the president's wishes. So that is a very big deal. Yes, the president did backflip on that position, which we'll talk about a bit more later, and said, yes, I support this. But he did that because he knew that he'd lost the support to block that legislation. Because, Jane, on top of all of this, President Trump, if he wanted to, if he really wanted these documents out there, he could release them himself. He's got that power. He doesn't need to rely on Congress for that.
Yeah, and he could have done it at any point since he's become president. And we should just point out, just in terms of him finally signing that bill, we are recording this at 9:30 a.m. Sydney time on the Thursday. So for our listeners, it may have happened by the time you listen to it, but it just hasn't happened at the time of record. Now, in terms of this story, Jeffrey Epstein, the Epstein Files, I feel like it's been in the news cycle for so long, and we have covered some of the history and the background of it in a previous podcast, so people can listen to that if they want to. But just in terms of getting to this point, Reid, you've touched on it. How much pressure has there been to get these documents out there?
Jane, there's always been pressure, especially from the survivors, from those victims, the victims' families. But now there is more pressure than there ever has been. That is for a few reasons again. I think the key reason is that past administrations, the Biden administration, for instance, there was a big push to try and get the Epstein Files released at that point, and the pressure was definitely there. But the difference here is that Donald Trump and his team, including Vice President J.D. Vance, they campaigned to get elected last year on releasing these files, the Epstein Files. It has become over the years a massive point of discussion, particularly on social media, which is another reason why the pressure is so high here. But especially in Donald Trump's base, the MAGA base, they have always suspected, the vast majority of them anyway, have always suspected that there is some sort of cover-up here involving influential Americans who were linked in some way to Jeffrey Epstein, and they have always called for the release of those documents, all of them. And Trump, especially J.D. Vance, actually, his vice president, has leaned into that and have in a lot of ways said, yes, if you vote for us, we will release those documents. So what happens? They get elected, they're back in the White House. Donald Trump is suddenly in a position where he has to follow through on that, and the hopes of his base and also, of course, of the survivors are incredibly high. And then you get this months and months of back and forth, Donald Trump flipping his position, but for the vast amount of time, the majority of the time, being very much against the release of these documents. A total backflip in that regard, and that has really upset a lot of people, especially his supporters. So that pressure is huge, and that's why this decision, this vote, was so important.
Yeah, I mean, he went from promising to release it to then calling it a Democrat hoax. And we heard the Attorney General saying, yep, they're on my desk ready to release, and then they weren't releasing them. What do you think it was that finally pushed him over the edge to say, okay, you know, Republicans, you can sign it? Because there were sort of the main, I think it was 3 or 4 Republicans who were keen to get the documents out there, and all the others were towing the Donald Trump line until he finally flipped.
Yeah, it's like you sort of have to, you definitely feel for the victims in this instance, but you feel for his supporters as well, because it is whiplash. It is changing, flipping around all over the place, Donald Trump's views on this. The big headlines were a couple of days ago, Donald Trump has switched his position. He's now urging Republicans, House Republicans, to vote for this bill. He says he will sign it if it makes it through, if it did make it through the Senate. But before that, he said he would sign it if it landed on his desk. And everyone thought, wow, is this yet another change from the president? But what I think it was in reality, Jane, is that Donald Trump knew, it became apparent through his communications, probably in Washington, D.C., his ears on the ground, it became very obvious that this bill to release the Epstein Files was going to sail through the House. And he knew it had the votes. He knew there was no chance, and that is when he decided to switch that position and actually say, okay, yes, I know we've been arguing against the release, but we're not going to win this one. I don't want to look like a loser. Vote for this and I'll sign it, and we'll deal with the outcome later. So that's why we had that change, because it goes back to if he really did want these released, he could have done it, as we said. So it's not as if his position has really changed from a personal perspective, I would say, but definitely from a political one. He saw the votes and realised he needed to switch things up.
So in terms of those votes, there was one lone Republican who held out against this. What was his reasoning?
Yeah, so there was a massive amount of support for this, clearly in Washington, D.C. But yeah, you're right. There was one Republican from Louisiana who held out. The reason, his name is Clay Higgins, the reason he held out was a pretty standard one, nothing too dramatic. Basically, he just thought that this bill would contravene established criminal procedures. He essentially wanted to make sure that the bill passing wouldn't impact victims, and because of that, he decided to vote no for that. But that was essentially it. He thought that this bill was too unusual, that this kind of evidence shouldn't be released just because a law has been passed to say it has to be released, and he's managed to, I guess, stand his ground on that one. But obviously, it didn't do a whole lot of good, because it was so overwhelmingly supported. It was unanimous in the Senate, so it's been a massive success when it comes to getting that bill through both the Senate and the House.
Well, in terms of saying he was doing it for the victims, they have really been present this week. I think there was that incredibly powerful image of the women standing there saying, you know, we're women now, but holding photos, you know, this is who you're fighting for, holding photos of themselves as 14-year-olds.
Yeah, that just packs such a punch, and that is what people, what the victims want to be able to show. They don't actually want to be out there talking about this, of course. You hear them talking about how it's just bringing up such horrible memories and things that they've tried to just put out of their minds. But at the end of the day, yes, they're adults. They're talking now to the media in Washington, D.C., but they were young, they were children, they were way too young at all for this kind of horrific things to be happening to them when they were happening to them, when they were in Jeffrey Epstein's orbit and falling victim to his predatory behaviour. So they have been out in force, and they have been one of the key reasons that the pressure has been so high here. They have not given up. Interestingly, a lot of them, at least a couple of them who spoke yesterday, and I know last time they spoke at DC, it was a similar story. They voted for Trump in a lot of these instances. They thought that Trump was the bloke that was going to help them finally get what they wanted, get these documents out into the public. And now we saw some powerful language yesterday from victims, or earlier this week from victims, talking about how they consider Trump to be disgraceful for how he's handled this issue. They want to meet him. He hasn't been down to talk to them. He has turned it into very much a game of politics, in their words. They fear they're being forgotten in all of this. Calling the Epstein investigation a Democrat hoax and the like. They say it's got nothing to do with Republicans or Democrats. It's a human thing, and they feel like they're getting lost here. So it is, but they're not going to give up. And interestingly, there's some threats, because they're scared, Jane. They were worried about legal repercussions for speaking out. They're worried about their safety in a lot of these instances. They've been told that they can't say things. They know things and can remember things that they can't say from a legal perspective, because it could be incredibly bad for them. But then you've got Republicans and Democrats, some lawmakers who are actually there supporting them, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a very big supporter of Donald Trump and is actually a MAGA sweetheart, and she's actually gone against Trump and this in a big way, and she's absolutely in the victims' corners here. But interestingly, I was listening to a Republican senator who was talking about, a Republican lawmaker who was talking about that if there isn't a result here in these, if there's any more roadblocks to these documents being released, he's going to go to the floor of Congress and actually read out the names of the people who are involved in this list himself. He's going to say it, he'll be protected because he's doing it in Congress there, and can't necessarily be attacked from a basic legal perspective from those people. And he said he would do that if that's what it takes, if he's not happy with what happens here. And that would be that would be wild. And we're used to seeing wild things in DC, and that I think would be up there with the craziest if this politician just goes in there and starts naming the people in the files because he's fed up. So the story has a lot yet to give on it, Jane. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Does. And that's why, again, back to pressure. The pressure is there.
And just the incredible bravery of those victims to have kept this up for so long and to finally be on the verge of getting what they want. I think, shout out to them for doing what they have done so far. So at this point in time, we've spoken, the Epstein Transparency Act hasn't yet landed on Donald Trump's desk. He said he will sign it if and when it does. What will happen then?
So if he signs that bill, which he has said that he would do, the Department of Justice would then have 30 days until it would be forced to release the remaining documents, compelled to release those remaining documents. Then there would be a process. So that's when the law kicks in, 30 days. But then there is a process that would happen, which could happen, which would involve the redaction of any personal names, details of the victims in there. Part of this legislation, it does say that the victims need to be protected. So that would require going through a lot of documents. We're talking tens of thousands, if not more, documents to make sure that those victims' names are redacted. And then once that is done, this is one of the potential routes of what will happen. The documents will be released. So we don't know a time frame. It could be by the end of the year if they're really fast about it. It obviously could be much longer than that. They might have already started the process. Who knows? The other option that could happen here. So say if Trump doesn't sign it or vetoes it. If he doesn't sign it, there's a delay, and then the legislation, it becomes law anyway, and then the process starts. If he vetoes it, it will need to go back to the House and back to the Senate, and they will have to vote to override that veto, and that is obviously would likely happen because it enjoyed near unanimous support. So no matter which way you look at it at this point, this legislation is going to become the law of the land. It's going to come into effect unless there's some dramatic change. But at this stage, regardless of whether Trump signs or vetoes, it looks like it is going to go into place. But the reason where it could all fall apart for the victims who are hoping for this release at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later, the Department of Justice could say, no, we're not going to release these documents because there is an active investigation in place at the moment when it comes to the Department of Justice being asked by Donald Trump. The Department of Justice was asked by Donald Trump to investigate some high-profile Democrats in just last week, I think it was, as part of this Epstein case. So that's an active investigation, and the writing of the legislation, it actually permits, it allows for the Department of Justice to not release those documents if there's a chance it could compromise an active investigation. So that could be a potential outcome here as well, Jane.
Yeah, that's something the victims, I've read, are worried about, that the Attorney General or the Department of Justice, on the Attorney General's behalf, might step in and stop some of those documents getting out there. But in terms of the documents themselves, I mean, we've had sort of a bit of a drip feed over the last years, I guess, of bits and pieces of these documents. You know, the emails between Epstein and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, that birthday card that was allegedly sort of drawn and written by Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein. Give us an idea of some of the things that we already know have been in these files.
Yeah, so I think it's about 33,000 documents, Jane, have already been released here, drip-fed to the public through various means, mainly from what's called a House Oversight Committee, which is in possession of the documents, and it has been releasing some of those documents to the media. I think there's been 2 big drops, including one just recently. But you mentioned, I think the key elements that have come out already, fascinatingly, it was that birthday book release, where there was in possession of this investigators was a birthday book for Jeffrey Epstein. I think it was his 60th birthday, and he had a lot of friends writing him notes as part of this book, organised by Ghislaine Maxwell. One of those notes was purported to be from Donald Trump, who for many years Epstein considered him his closest friend. That's what Epstein has said to people in the past. And there was a drawing in there that appeared to show an image of a naked woman, or an outline of her body, and there was also a very personal note written to Epstein that was allegedly from Donald Trump. That was reported before those files were released. Donald Trump denied the existence of that letter, and then the letter itself found its way to the media. The book itself found its way to the media with that drawing. And Donald Trump didn't really have much to say about it. He's still saying that he wasn't responsible for it. So that was something that was quite significant, evidence of their relationship, but also no evidence of any kind of wrongdoing. The guys were friends at that stage, so that's not exactly any kind of smoking gun. And I think that's the key thing. There hasn't been an example of a smoking gun released yet, which is why a lot of people are so desperate for more of those files to be released. We've also seen evidence of names mentioned in connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Again, no proof of any wrongdoing, no smoking gun, but Elon Musk's name has been in the files there, in the flight logs. You've seen Prince Andrew, as you mentioned, has been mentioned as well. Bill Clinton has been mentioned. Michael Jackson has been mentioned in previously released files. So you've got those big names, so playing into that whole idea that these are really powerful people that have been connected to Jeffrey Epstein. A lot of the files that have been released so far, though, heavily redacted, which is also further angered people who want more of this information. And the redactions are something that will likely be happening as well when this next drop happens. But yeah, so lots of information released already, Jane, but nothing that is satisfying those who want more.
So what is it that these people are hoping will come out when these documents are released? Are they looking for, smoking guns related to high-profile or influential people? Is that the key to this, do you think?
Yeah, I think, excuse me, I think it very much comes down to the questions of who was involved, who was on in Epstein's inner circle, who was potentially being potentially part of his criminal conduct, and also who knew what and when. So they're the things that people really, really want to know. And I think there's a lot of people who think that, yes, many documents have been released, but is there a reason why there is no smoking gun? Have they only been released because no one's actually been implicated yet in these crimes? Is that why these documents have been released already? What is in those remaining Epstein files? I think the perception is that hidden in those files that are yet to be released, which should be released as part of this vote, if all goes the way that the survivors are hoping for, are those details. Who was involved? What did people know? A lot of people, it has become a political issue. People on the left side of politics are desperate to try and get something that could potentially hit Donald Trump and the Republicans and get them inroads against the Republican side of politics. So that's what people are hoping for. The question is that what they'll get?
Yeah, and I might let you take a drink of water or whatever if you need to do that here, Reid. I feel like the fact that Jeffrey Epstein managed to kill himself while in a high security prison is part of what has been fueling these, this huge sort of conspiracy theory around this case. And obviously there's very emotional and personal reasons why the victims are pushing for these documents to be released. But sort of that conspiracy theory is what is motivating a lot of the commentary on the outside, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
I feel like, there is this expectation that everybody is going to get a big dump of files and it is going to reveal this huge conspiracy and that it went right to the top of whatever it did and it implicated all of these people. So I guess my question, and this is hypothetical, you're not going to know the answer to it, but just thinking about this whole thing, what if it does reveal this enormous conspiracy? But on the other hand, what if it doesn't?
Yeah, I think you're spot on because, and also just to start off, the Trump administration has certainly done themselves no favors in trying to quell concerns that there is a conspiracy or cover-up. For starters, like I said, they campaigned on the fact that these should be released. But then, on the other hand, since Trump has returned to office, he's switched sides so many times. He has tried to dismiss this altogether. You had the Attorney General saying, yes, I've got the files here, I've got a list on my desk, and then she then backtracks and says that's not what I actually meant. And so many different things. It's like been a roller coaster. There's been meetings in the Situation Room about these Epstein files. It has just been non-stop. So people are... and then, as we mentioned, there are some released. Here you go. These are the files, and then they're all redacted. So, I definitely understand why people are adamant that there is a conspiracy here and a cover-up. Like that does not surprise me at all. And there is some evidence to suggest that maybe. Well, there's definitely evidence to suggest that that there's definitely information that they're trying to not be put out into the
Yeah.
public, the Trump administration. It is just so interesting to see. But yeah, I think that I get my thought is, Jane, that nobody is ever going to be happy with
Yes.
what is released here. People have in their mind that there is a list of billionaires, famous people, celebrities that were all on Epstein's client list and have all committed these horrific crimes and engaged in sexual trafficking. People think they're going to get that list released and it'll be a hit list of the worst offenders. That I don't think exists. So at least we've been told by the White House that doesn't exist. So unless that something as clear as that is released, and we know that even with the files, even if they are released, they're going to be heavily redacted.
Yeah.
I think people aren't going to ever be happy with what comes out here. And once that idea of a cover-up and conspiracy settles in, which it has, namely thanks to social media, that's not going away. It's hard to get rid of that. So how long is this going to drag on for? One thing is certain though, Jane, it is a nightmare for Trump. You can tell he hates the fact that this is sucking up oxygen, the news cycle. He hates that this is a constant line of inquiry from journalists, and he wants it to just go away. Maybe he wants it to go away just because it is sucking up oxygen and distracting from his other issues he wants to be more focused on. But he does not like the fact that this is dominating the news here. No,
and you could tell that yesterday in his reactions to two female journalists who asked him questions about it. I mean, I can't think of another leader who could respond that way to journalists. He called one of them piggy, quiet piggy. I mean, I can't imagine another world leader who would say something like that and for that not to shock people.
Yeah, it was really horrible to watch that particular example you mentioned there, a reporter asking questions that were totally within there had just been some of those Epstein Files released, and his name, Donald Trump's name, was mentioned in it in the context of an email between Jeffrey Epstein and I think it was his brother, and it was a totally fair line of questioning of a really important topic. And yeah, he called her, he said quiet piggy to her in front of everybody. And then you had an instance as well on the day the vote was happening where another female reporter asked a question that anyone would want to ask, right? Why don't you just release the files yourself? Because you've got the power to, as we've discussed. And he shut her down and called her a terrible reporter, and it appeared genuinely angry in both those instances. So you can tell it is getting under his skin, these questions. And also, that's not doing any favours for the White House either. It just looks like he's trying to shut it down left, right and centre when people have genuine questions about it, including a lot of his supporters.
And before we get to the end, I want to take this back to the victims, because it's really their persistence and their courage that has led things to get to this point. And one woman who's been at the centre of that, who is no longer with us, but has had her family taking the ball up on her behalf, is Virginia Giuffre, of course, the prominent accuser of the former Prince Andrew. Her memoir really has kind of come out and stirred a lot of this up.
Yeah, it absolutely has, and it puts a really devastating human face, a human story of loss to this tragic to this crime that Jeffrey Epstein, this huge, I think it was the largest sex trafficking, or at least one of, if not the most widespread sex trafficking criminal network in history, or criminal investigation in history. This guy has done some horrible, horrible things. And to see Virginia Giuffre and to read that memoir that was published posthumously, it brings this home as to why we care so much about this. It is so devastating for so many people, and to think that they know that there's information out there, that Virginia knew there was information out there that wasn't being released, that was being sat on, which is 100% a fact, and was so devastated about that. That just really brings it home about why this is such a big story. These victims, their families, Virginia's brother's done such an amazing job standing up with other victims there at Washington, D.C. as well, speaking on behalf of his sister, who obviously couldn't be there. it's all about the victims in the end, and they are the ones that have fought the entire time for this. And when there were cheers yesterday, there were cheers when that vote went through from the victims, and to think of how they'll feel if and when the remaining documents are released and justice has been served in that regard, that will be a special day.
And finally, Reid, I mean, I hate to end on a pessimistic tone when, this has been such a huge political victory for those people who fought so long, but you touched on this earlier. I mean, the way this story has evolved over the years and over the decades, and, the conspiracy theories involved, I just get the sense that even when these documents are released, there are so many loopholes that are going to allow redactions and bits, to not be released because of ongoing criminal proceedings. I just feel like there's always going to be people who think there is more out there, that it isn't all, now out in the sunlight. Do you agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Jane. I think that regardless of what's put out, there's going to be people who say there's more, we're being lied to, because those people just exist in so many of these kinds of situations. They think the moon landing was faked, all of those kinds of examples. But I think it's going to be really fascinating to see how the Trump administration handles it, because if they do say, look, we're all about transparency, here are the documents, we're following the law that has been passed and put into law, here are the documents, and they're still all redacted, or if they try and weasel their way out of trying to release the documents at all by saying that there's a investigation ongoing, we can't put it out at all. Those things, it's going to reflect very poorly on the White House. Trump is obviously all about perception, right? And his image and how he's getting received. Because this is such a big issue from his base and from fellow Republicans who are desperate for these files to be released, it's a fascinating juggling act for Trump and the White House to see what happens here, because if people aren't satisfied, if it's put out and people are still not satisfied, the majority of people are unhappy. As we said, there's always going to be those few that will never be satisfied. It's going to be difficult, because if Trump wants people to stop talking about this and says there's nothing to hide, he should just put them out, and hopefully everyone, or the majority of people, will just shut up about it.
Yeah, well, let's hope that happens, and if it doesn't, I think there's going to be those persistent voices that we mentioned, those courageous women are just going to keep pushing until it is out there. But this week, a momentous step in the right direction, hey?
Yeah, absolutely.
Reid Butler, thank you for joining us on today's Take.
Thanks, Jane.
And thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, I will see you bright and early with the rest of the Today team. Have a great day.